So you want to beat Napoleon. Picture 615,000 men crossing the Niemen in 1812. The bicorn hat, the cannon, the red coats standing in square in the mud at Waterloo, the ships of the line hove to off the coast with their gun ports open. Drums, horses, a field at evening with the smoke still lying on it. That is the picture. Here is the account. For that one day at Waterloo in 1815, the British Army was paid £978,850 4D in prize money. For the single year 1813, the Navy alone was voted £21,212,012. The Treasury's book of that fund survives. The receipt any one soldier signed does not. You are not the general in the picture. You are the clerk behind him, and the war is your account. Every horse in it eats. Every man in it draws pay on a fixed day whether he fought that week or not. Every ship was bought long before it was used. Somebody signs for all of that in an office in Whitehall with a quill and a very long column. The picture is one day. The account is 22 years. Start with the total at the bottom of the column because it is the only figure everyone agrees on. The whole war cost Britain £831 million across the 22 years to 1815. Now find the line everyone remembers. Britain was the paymaster of Europe. It bought the coalitions, kept Austria in the field, armed Portugal and Spain. That is the story, and it is not wrong. The cash Britain actually handed those allies across the years to 1814 was £46,289,549, 5.57% of the bill, 1/20th of the page. So where did the other 19/20ths go? Not into the British Army, which never passed 220,000 regulars, outnumbered nearly 3-to-1 by the force that invaded Russia on its own. Not into the crews either. In 1813, the Navy carried 138,000 men, officers and Marines included, and that was its high watermark. Add them together, under 400,000 people. That is the entire fighting establishment behind a bill of £831 million run up in the years to 1815. Somebody else was doing a great deal of the fighting. Somebody else was eating a great deal of the money. There is one figure this account holds back until the very end, and it is the smallest one in it. What a single private soldier carried away from that Waterloo fund, you will get it. Not yet. And there is a hole in the paper. What survives is the Treasury side. The votes, the warrants, the schedule of shares by rank, the clerk's totals ruled in ink. What is missing is everything below the ranks. Not one line in a private's own hand, not one note of the stoppages taken out of his ones a day for bread and shoes before he ever saw a coin of it. There is a second gap, and it sits at the other end of the war. Wellington's army in Spain was paid in metal. Where that metal came from is not in the Bank of England's books, and the man who found it was not a soldier, both close before the end. So take the desk, and take the first question anyone at that desk has to answer. What, precisely, is the money for? You are not buying victories. You are buying other men's armies and the metal to put in their hands. And those are two separate purchases on two separate markets, and only one of them can be settled with a promise. The armies you can buy on credit. The metal you cannot. Start with the promise, because that is the part Britain was good at. A government that wants to fight for 20 years does not pay for the war out of this year's taxes. It borrows, and it services the borrowing out of taxes. And the thing that decides whether it can keep doing that is not patriotism. It is whether a man in the city believes he will be paid his interest in January. Which is why the legal frame around all of this arrives, in the end, as a tax statute. The Act of 1799 charged 2s in the pound on incomes above £200 a year, sliding down to 2d in the pound at £60. 2 shillings in the pound is a tenth. It was the first income tax any British government had levied, and it was frankly hated. It required a man to state, in writing to a clerk, what he earned. Merchants regarded that as an outrage. Landowners regarded it as an outrage aimed at them. It passed anyway, because the alternative was losing. And here is the part that surprises almost everyone about the country that outfinanced Napoleon. The tax missed. Pitt told the House it would bring in £10 million a year. The first year brought a little over £6 million. Not because the country was poor, the country was the richest in Europe, but because a self-assessed tax on invisible income is a tax on honesty. And honesty was in shorter supply than gold. Men understated. Men declared nothing. Men moved money into forms the assessors could not see. and you can read the statute backwards to find out where the money went. The act spends its length chasing income that has no field to walk into and no roof to count. Profits of trade, interest on securities, the earnings of a partnership, fees. Land was easy. Land does not move and cannot lie about its acreage. Everything the drafters worried about is everything that had grown rich in the previous 40 years and had never been touched by a tax collector before. The law tells you what was profitable by telling you what it was frightened of losing. The shape of that defines everything after it. Britain was a country of about 16 million people, facing a France of 30 million. It had just invented the most powerful revenue instrument in Europe and discovered, in year one, that it could not collect what it had voted itself. So the shortfall goes on the credit line. It always goes on the credit line. That is what you are buying with, not a full purse, a signature, a schedule of interest payments, and the reputation to keep making them for another decade. Now the door price, and the door price is a ship. On 16 November 1807, at Chatham Dockyard, they knocked away the shores, and HMS Warspite went down the slip into the Medway. 74 guns. Third rate, which means not the biggest thing afloat, but the thing the fleet was actually made of, the workhorse that blockaded Brest in February gales, and chased frigates in the Atlantic, and sat off Toulon for 2 years at a time, waiting for a French admiral to lose his nerve. She cost £59,725 to build, one ship, one time in 1807. Put a crew in her, 600 men. That is roughly £99 1d of ship per man, before she has fired a shot, before a single barrel of salt beef has gone into her hold, before anyone has been paid anything at all. Here is the part that catches people out. Money was not what limited the fleet. Trees were. A ship of the line is a forest that has been cut down, seasoned, and reassembled in the shape of a box that floats. Not any trees, either. Oak, grown slow, grown crooked in the specific ways a shipwright needs. The knee that takes a right angle. The compass timber that follows the curve of a hull. You cannot plant that in 1808 and use it in 1812. It takes a century. The Navy took 50,000 loads of oak a year. The whole of Britain, every house frame, every cart, every barrel, every mill wheel, every roof beam in the country used 218,000 loads a year. The Navy was taking 22.94% of it. Think of it as a builder who takes nearly a quarter of all the bricks made in the country, every year for 20 years, and whose customer will not accept a substitute and will not wait. Everything else in the economy that wanted oak had to get in line behind him or pay above him. That is not a bill, that is a standing seizure of the physical supply. And the fleet grew anyway. It carried 96,000 men in 1795 and 138,000 in 1813. A rise of more than 2/5 in 18 years in the one branch of the service that cannot be raised by beating a drum in a market square, because a landsman is not a topman and will not become one before the next gale. The vote that fed all of it reached £21,212,012 for the single year 1813. About 6.4% of everything the country produced that year, and that is the Navy alone, before a single soldier has been paid. I am not going to tell you what any of these figures are worth in today's money, because the answer would be a fiction. There is no exchange rate between 1813 and now. Compare inside the period instead, and the comparison is plain enough. 174 gun ship, hull and fitting out, cost £59,725 in 1807. The naval vote for the single year 1813 would have bought 355 of them. The ship is the one-time cost. Now the line that never stops. Pay runs whether anything happens or not. It runs in winter quarters. It runs on the transport that never sailed. It runs for the battalion that spent the whole of 1811 in a fever hospital in Walcheren without seeing a Frenchman. And it runs at exactly the same rate as it does for the men in the square. Take the pay tables and read down them. An infantry private, one's a day. That is the famous shilling, the king's shilling, the one they press into your palm at the recruiting table. It is also gross, not net. Stoppages for bread, for shoes, for a shirt to replace the one you wore out, all come off before you are handed anything. A cavalry private, 2's a day, double. Except that 9d of that 2 shillings is the subsistence of the horse, not the man. The animal draws 3/4 of the difference. The trooper is paid 1 shilling and 3 pence to be a cavalryman, And the horse is paid 9 pence to be a horse, and the horse eats first because a hungry trooper can still march, and a hungry horse cannot carry him. An infantry captain, 9s 5d a day, 9.5 times the private, which sounds enormous until you remember he bought his commission, buys his own uniform, keeps a servant and a horse out of it, and is running what amounts to a small unincorporated business with 100 men in it. At sea in 1807, an able seaman, 1 pound 136d per lunar month. Note the unit, not a calendar month, a lunar month 28 days, 13 of them in a year rather than 12, which is the kind of arithmetic that only ever runs one way. An ordinary seaman, 1 grade down, drew 1 pound 56d per lunar month on the same 1807 table. None of those numbers moved much across the war. That is the point of a fixed line. The variable line is the ally, and the ally is expensive in a completely different way. In 1814, Britain sent out 7,620,660 pounds in cash and 1,582,045 pounds in arms, clothing, muskets, boots, powder. Cash on demand in a year, negotiated country by men who knew perfectly well that Britain had no alternative supplier. But here is the obligation nobody ever voted for, and it sits underneath every one of those lines. On 27 February 1797, the Bank of England stopped paying out gold. Not for a week. Its notes stayed inconvertible for 24 years. Read what that does to a pay table. Every figure on it, the shilling, the 2 shillings, the 9 and 5, the pound 13 and 6, is now denominated in a piece of paper that says the bank will pay the bearer on demand, and the bank will not. At home, that is survivable. A shopkeeper in Portsmouth takes the note, because everyone he owes takes it too. In the peninsula, it is worthless. A Spanish farmer with 2 mules and a cart of barley has never heard of Threadneedle Street and does not care what is printed on your paper. Your fixed cost was never the pay. It was the currency the pay was written in. Here is the mechanism by which all that effort turns into somebody else's money. Start with what borrowing on this scale does to the price of the borrowing itself. Consols, the government's perpetual stock, 3%, no repayment date, just an income forever, averaged a price of 90 in 1792. That is the last peace year. By 1797 and 1798, they had fallen below 51. The stock did not change. The promise did not change. What changed is that the market had watched the government come back for more and more and more. That is the trap in the middle of the arrangement. Every fresh pound the state promises makes the last pound of promise cheaper. Sell stock at 90 and you borrow at something near 3%. Sell the same stock at 50 and you borrow at nearer 6. Work harder at raising money and the money gets dearer as you raise it. Now the part that will annoy you. London's credit market did not close when the war opened. It went on trading, and one of the people it traded with was Napoleon. In 1803, France sold Louisiana, the Mississippi, New Orleans, a third of a continent, for 80 million francs. The buyer was the United States. The United States did not have 80 million francs, and Napoleon did not want American paper spread over 15 years. He wanted cash that season for an army. So the deal went through a bank. 2 banks. Baring Brothers of London and Hope and Company of Amsterdam took the 60 million francs of American 6% stock off France, under an agreement of 3 April 1803 for 52 million francs. 8 million francs of discount straight out for taking the paper and the waiting. Then, in July 1803, they advanced Napoleon 10 million francs before the settlement even started, and thereafter France was paid 2 million francs a month, 23 months of it, after an opening installment of 6. Look at the dates. Britain and France went back to war in May 1803. Alexander Baring, of a London house, was in Paris that spring. The advance was paid in July. A British bank was wiring the French treasury a monthly income while the 2 countries were at war. I am keeping francs and pounds apart here on purpose, and not adding them. The exchange between them moved through the war, and any single conversion would be a made-up number. What matters is not the rate. What matters is the direction. British capital was so much the deepest pool in Europe that even the man Britain was fighting had to come to it and pay a spread to a London partner for the privilege. And the London partner, entirely legally, took the spread. That is the mechanism. You are the richest state in the war. Being the richest state in the war means the war is priced in your money on your market by men who will sell to either side. Now do the coin problem as a sum and do it in one currency. Everything from here is sterling. By August 1812, Wellington needed 100,000 pounds a month in metal to keep his army in the field. Not credit, not bills on London. Coin, in kegs, on mules, going up mountain roads to a paymaster's tent. Over a year, that is 1,200,000 pounds in physical money that has to be found, bought, carried, and guarded. Now price the buying. In the second half of 1813, gold stood at a premium of over 40%. A guinea holding 260 of gold at the mint price was changing hands for notes worth 2 threes or more. So every pound of paper you send abroad to be turned into coin comes back as noticeably less than a pound of coin. And the more of it you send, the worse the rate gets, because you are the buyer and everybody in the market can see you coming. Which is why, in January 1814, the commissary-in-chief did something a government is not supposed to do. J.C. Harries authorized a private banker to go and buy the enemy's own currency. The banker was Nathan Rothschild. The authority, dated January 1814, was to collect French gold and silver coin in Germany, France, and Holland, not exceeding in value 600,000 pounds. His brothers went out across the continent buying in small parcels, deliberately small, so that no single purchase moved a local price or told anyone what was happening. The coin came back through couriers and smugglers' boats and went south to Wellington. And look at what was actually in the kegs, because it tells you how thin the supply had got. Austrian coin, Prussian coin, French coin, silver dollars out of Mexico and the United States, a gold piece from Colombia, a gold coin struck by the Mughal emperors in India, which had crossed half the world to end up paying a Portuguese muleteer for a load of barley outside Bayonne. When a government is buying metal by weight and provenance stops mattering, that is not a purchasing policy. That is a scramble. His fee was a commission of 2%. 2% of that 600,000 pounds total is 12,000 pounds. For one commission. For arranging that metal should be in a particular place at a particular time. Set that against the ship. A 74-gun ship of the line cost 59,725 pounds in 1807. So the fee for moving the money, not the money, the fee, ran to about a fifth of a ship of the line. One commission, one banker, 1/5 of a warship, and set the ship against the man. She carried 600 men, which is 99 pounds 1/1d of ship per man. Now hold that against what the man himself costs. The private ashore drew ones a day. Over 12 months, that is 18 pounds 5s a year, before a penny of stoppages comes off. So 99 pounds 1/1d of oak and iron per man, against 18 pounds 5s a year of wages for him. The ship costs more than 5 years of the man. Add the run-up out loud. 174-gun ship in 1807, 59,725 pounds. 1 month of Wellington's coin in 1812, 100,000 pounds. One banker's commission in 1814, 12,000 pounds. That is 171,725 pounds in total before a single soldier in that army has been paid his shilling for the day. The soldier is the cheap part. He was always the cheap part. The thing that breaks it has a name and a year. The Continental System from 1806, hardening through 1807 and 1808. Napoleon's attempt to close every port in Europe to British goods and bankrupt the country that was paying for the war against him. It worked for a while, and you can watch it in the trade returns. British domestic exports, manufactures and colonial produce, the declared values, stood at 43 million pounds in 1808. In 1809, they contracted to 36 million pounds. 7 million pounds of trade gone in a single year, and with it the customs and excise receipts that were the real backbone of the revenue, the taxes that came in whether a man declared his income honestly or not. Grain went the other way, and worse. Wheat had averaged 5/7 1d a quarter in 1803. By 1812, it averaged 12/2 8d a quarter, more than double, and I should say plainly that price series for these years disagree. One respected run gives 12/6 6d for 1812 rather than 12/2 8d. Take whichever you like. The shape does not change, so look at what your account is doing to itself. The tax base is contracting. The bread the tax base eats has doubled. Every regiment you feed and every seaman you victual is being fed out of that same market, at that same price, at exactly the moment your export receipts fall. That is what a blockade is for. Not to sink ships, to make the enemy's own bookkeeping impossible. Now look at the other side of the field, because Napoleon has an answer to his own bills, and it is a good one. He does not pay for his wars. He makes the wars pay for themselves. The army lives off the country it has just walked into, and the country it has just beaten is then sent an invoice. Prussia, after Tilsit, was held to an indemnity of 120 million francs, with French troops sitting on Prussian soil until it was paid. That is not a treaty term. That is a bailiff with a corps of infantry. It is a superb system, and it has exactly one condition. It only works in a country worth eating. Here is where the answer stops working. About 615,000 men crossed the Niemen from 24 June 1812. About 112,000 came back. The Russians did not defeat that army so much as decline to feed it. They fell back and burned what they left. There were no villages to requisition, no granaries to open, no rich merchant town to invoice at the end of it. The financing model and the marching model were the same thing, and when the food went, both went together. Living off the land was never a marching order. It was a financing method. And it is the only financing method in this war that cannot be refinanced because you cannot borrow bread from a field that has been burned. So put the two columns side by side, same treasury, same book, a good year against the whole thing. Take 1814 as the good year, and it genuinely was one. The Allies are winning. The subsidy is buying results instead of postponing defeats. Britain sends out £7,620,660 in cash in the single year 1814, plus £1,582,045 in muskets, boots, powder, and clothing. Grain has come back down. Wheat averages 7 twos 1d a quarter in 1814 against the 12 twos 8d a quarter of 1812. That is not a small thing. That is bread falling by 2/5 in 2 years in a country where bread was most of what a laboring family bought. The naval vote is holding at £21,212,012 for the single year 1813, and the fleet is doing the one job that pays for itself, keeping the sea lanes open so the customs receipts keep arriving. Now here is what the good year was actually buying, and it is the answer to a question this account left open a long way back. At the 1813 peak, British money was paying for about 450,000 Allied soldiers. Prussians, Russians, Austrians, Portuguese, Spaniards, Germans of a dozen sorts. Set that against a British Navy carrying 138,000 men in 1813 and a British Army that never passed the figure you already have. More than twice as many foreign soldiers were on Britain's account as British sailors. The country that is remembered for Trafalgar and Waterloo spent most of the war buying other people's infantry, and the reason the subsidy line looks small is not that Britain was mean. It is that foreign infantry, paid in a currency the foreigner already used, in his own country, eating his own country's food, is the cheapest fighting on the market. A Prussian corps costs Britain a warrant. A British corps costs Britain the warrant, the transports, the coin, the victualling convoy, and the ship of the line escorting it. And notice which of those two things Britain could not buy at any price. It could always find another ally. There were always governments in Europe that wanted French troops off their territory and were short of money to arrange it. What it could not conjure was hulls and seasoned oak and men who had been at sea long enough to reef a topsail in the dark. Those took decades. The subsidy line is small because the subsidy was the cheap half of the war, and the cheap half was the half Britain could expand at will. Now the other column. Not a bad year. The whole war, £831 million spent across the 22 years to 1815. Of that, £46,289,549 was cash to allies across the years to 1814, 5.57%. And at the end of it, when the shooting stopped, a national debt of £679 million, more than double everything the country produced in a year. Different accountings put that peak higher. The lower figure is used here, and it is quite bad enough. So name these spread out loud. In the good column, renting an entire Allied army for £7,620,660 in 1814. In the bad column, owing £679 million by 1815 and having to service it, out of taxes, for the rest of the century. The interest on it becoming the single largest item in the British budget for decades after the last man had come home. That is the spread you are buying, not the risk of losing. The certainty that even winning leaves a debt that outlives everyone who voted for it. Back to the fund. Here is the part almost nobody checks. The commander's share and the private share came out of the same pot, on the same schedule, signed off by the same clerk. Out of the 978,850 pounds 1/5s 4D distributed for 1 day at Waterloo in 1,815, a general took 1,274 pounds 1s 1D. A captain took 90 pounds each, a subaltern 34 pounds. And the man who stood in the square, the one in the picture, the one with the musket, the one the whole thing was about, took 2 pounds 1/1s 4D each, one share, one time, for 1,815. Wellington took 61,000 pounds out of that same 1,815 fund and handed 40,000 pounds of it back to the treasury. Some accounts say 60,000 rather than 61. That is the only part of this anybody argues about. Nathan Rothschild, who never stood in a square, took 2% on every consignment of coin he shipped, and by his own account, it was the best business he ever did. So, you are not buying victories. You are buying other men's armies and the metal to pay them, and every figure in this account says so. 46,289,549 pounds in cash to allies across the years to 1,814, against one soldier's 2 pounds 1/1s 4D for the day that ended it. Two ways of spending money on a war. One of them is the whole strategy. The other is what the strategy paid the man at the point of contact, which brings you back to the picture at the start. The bicorn hat, the red coats, the smoke on the field at evening. That is what survives in oil paint, and it is entirely real. What survives in writing is something else. A clerk's column, a schedule of shares by rank, a warrant for coin bought in Amsterdam, a banker's commission at 2%. The Treasury's book survives. The private's book was never kept. He got his 2 pounds 1/1s 4D for 1,815, and nobody wrote down what he did with it.